In the summer of 1381, a dramatic confrontation unfolded in Smithfield, London. King Richard II, a mere boy, faced down an angry multitude of 20,000 armed peasants. This was the climax of the Peasants' Revolt, a moment of profound social upheaval. The revolt's charismatic leader, Wat Tyler, was killed during this tense encounter. His death marked a turning point, but the rebellion itself was not an isolated incident. It was a direct consequence of a biological catastrophe that had struck England 3 decades earlier. The Black Death, arriving in 1348, had decimated the population. It killed an estimated 1/3 of England's people, fundamentally altering the fabric of medieval society. This plague set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably change the nation. The devastating plague reached England's shores in 1348, most likely at the port of Melcombe Regis in Dorset. From there, it spread rapidly, leaving a trail of death across the land. Within just 2 years, the Black Death claimed between 1.5 and 2 million lives. This represented a staggering 30 to 50% of England's total population. The speed and scale of the mortality were unprecedented in recorded history. No community, rich or poor, urban or rural, was spared its terrifying reach. The disease manifested primarily in its bubonic form, characterized by agonizing swellings known as buboes. These appeared in the groin, armpits, and neck, accompanied by high fever and a swift, often agonizing death. The suffering was immense and widespread. A more virulent pneumonic variant also emerged, attacking the lungs directly. This form was highly contagious, spreading through airborne droplets, and typically led to an even swifter demise. It left little time for treatment or even farewells. Medieval medicine proved utterly ineffective against such a formidable foe. Physicians offered futile remedies, from bloodletting to herbal concoctions, none of which stemmed the tide of death. The only widely accepted advice was flight, if one could afford it. The psychological impact on survivors was profound, shattering faith in traditional institutions and social order. The sheer scale of death challenged deeply held certainties about life, God, and community. Despair and fatalism became common sentiments. London, as a major urban centre, was particularly devastated. Mass graves were dug and filled with horrifying speed, unable to keep pace with the daily toll. The city's infrastructure and social services collapsed under the strain. Rural areas suffered equally, if not more so, due to their isolation and reliance on a stable workforce. Approximately 1,000 villages across England were completely abandoned, their populations wiped out or scattered. These became known as deserted medieval villages. Even before the Black Death, England was embroiled in a costly and defining conflict, the 100 Years' War. King Edward III had initiated this struggle by claiming the French throne, setting the stage for decades of intermittent warfare. His ambition was grand, but its cost was immense. Early successes brought a sense of national pride and military prowess. The naval victory at Sluys in 1340 secured English control of the Channel, a vital strategic advantage. This ensured the safe passage of troops and supplies to the continent. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 showcased the devastating effectiveness of English longbowmen. Their disciplined volleys decimated the French cavalry, marking a significant shift in military tactics. It was a triumph of skill over traditional chivalry. The subsequent siege of Calais in 1347 demonstrated English determination and endurance. After a long and arduous siege, the strategic port city fell, providing England with a crucial foothold on the European mainland. This victory solidified Edward's reputation. Another major triumph came at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, where the English, led by Edward the Black Prince, captured King John II of France. This stunning victory further humiliated the French monarchy and boosted English morale. It seemed England was invincible. However, these victories came at an enormous cost, placing immense strain on England's economy. The war was financed through heavy taxation, which fell disproportionately on the common people. This constant drain of resources fueled widespread discontent. Despite the military successes, these triumphs did not translate into lasting political control of France. The English struggled to administer conquered territories, and the French populace remained largely resistant to foreign rule. The war became a protracted and ultimately unwinnable endeavor. The demographic catastrophe wrought by the Black Death created an immediate and severe labor shortage across England. With so many dead, there were simply not enough hands to work the fields, tend the livestock, or perform essential services. This scarcity fundamentally altered the balance of power. Peasants, who had long been tied to the land and subject to their lords, suddenly found themselves with unprecedented bargaining power. They could demand higher wages, better working conditions, and greater freedoms. Their labor was now a precious commodity. Many seized this opportunity, abandoning their traditional villages and manors in search of better prospects elsewhere. The lure of higher pay and less restrictive feudal obligations proved irresistible. This mobility challenged the very foundations of the manorial system. The government, representing the interests of the landowning class, responded with legislation designed to curb these new freedoms. The Statute of Labourers, enacted in 1351, attempted to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. It was a desperate attempt to restore the old order. The statute also aimed to restrict worker mobility, making it illegal for peasants to leave their assigned manors without permission. It sought to force labourers back into their traditional roles, preventing them from seeking better opportunities. Penalties for non-compliance were severe. However, economic reality ultimately prevailed over legislative decree. Landlords, desperate to cultivate their fields and maintain their estates, found themselves competing fiercely for the available workforce. They were often forced to offer higher wages and more favorable terms, regardless of the law. This period saw profound societal changes that reshaped the medieval landscape. Peasants increasingly demanded the commutation of labor services for money rents. This meant paying a fixed sum instead of working directly on the lord's domain, a crucial step towards reducing serfdom. Increased social mobility became a defining feature of the post-plague era. Some enterprising peasants managed to accumulate land and wealth, rising to become independent yeoman farmers. They formed a new, more prosperous class within rural society. For the survivors, living standards generally improved. With fewer people and more resources, there was less competition for food and land. Many enjoyed better housing, a more varied diet, and access to more material possessions than their ancestors. However, these changes also created significant tensions within society. The authority of the lords was visibly eroded as their control over their workforce diminished. The church, too, struggled to adapt to the changing economic landscape and the questioning of traditional hierarchies. The simmering discontent finally erupted into open rebellion in 1381. The immediate trigger was the imposition of a harsh poll tax, the third such tax in 4 years. This particular tax demanded an equal payment from every adult, regardless of their wealth, making it deeply unfair to the poor. The uprising began in the counties of Essex and Kent, where organized resistance against tax collectors quickly escalated. Local officials were met with defiance, and the movement rapidly gained momentum, fueled by years of economic grievance and social frustration. As the revolt spread, charismatic leaders emerged from the ranks of the common people. Wat Tyler, a former soldier, quickly became the most prominent figure, demonstrating strategic acumen and a powerful ability to rally the masses. His leadership was crucial to the revolt's early success. The rebels marched on London, their numbers swelling as they advanced. Their demands were radical for the time: an end to serfdom, the abolition of all feudal services, and a reduction in rents. They also called for social equality and justice, challenging the established order. Upon reaching London, the rebels engaged in acts of revolutionary justice. They destroyed legal records, particularly those pertaining to feudal obligations, symbolizing their rejection of the old system. They also executed officials perceived as corrupt or oppressive, including the Archbishop of Canterbury. The young King Richard II, facing an unprecedented crisis, met with the rebels at Mile End. He promised to grant their demands, including charters of freedom for all serfs and the abolition of feudal services. This initial concession temporarily diffused some of the tension. However, a second meeting at Smithfield proved fatal for the revolt's leader. During a heated exchange, Wat Tyler was killed by the Lord Mayor of London, William Walworth. This sudden act of violence left the rebels leaderless and disoriented. Richard II, demonstrating remarkable courage and presence of mind, rode forward to address the stunned crowd. He declared himself their leader and promised to fulfill their demands, effectively diffusing the immediate crisis. The leaderless revolt soon dispersed, its main force broken. Although the Peasants' Revolt was ultimately suppressed, its impact was profound and its changes irreversible. The feudal system, already weakened by the Black Death, continued its decline. Market forces increasingly began to replace traditional feudal obligations. The revolt also expanded the scope of social mobility and popular participation in politics, even if indirectly. The ruling class had been forced to acknowledge the power of the common people, and the memory of their uprising lingered for generations. It demonstrated that the people could and would challenge authority. However, the seeds of future conflict were also sown. The longbow, which had dominated battlefields for decades, would eventually face new military technologies and tactics. The nature of warfare was slowly but surely evolving. The immediate aftermath of the Peasants' Revolt did not usher in an age of popular revolution. Instead, the next chapter in English history would be dominated by dynastic struggle. The Wars of the Roses, a brutal civil war between rival noble houses, lay just over the horizon. This period of internal strife would eventually pave the way for the rise of the Tudor dynasty. The Black Death and the subsequent social upheavals had fundamentally reshaped England, setting the stage for a new era of monarchy and national identity. The medieval world had truly been turned upside down,